I am Michael. I'm a small business owner. I'm an investor. I'm a work in process improv artist, a bit manic, and always looking for something new to entertain me. I'm a TV host and your host right now for what we call the Second Scene Podcast. It's a Dweebs global production. They supply free mentorship for people around the world. Anything from depression to resume help. They want to be there for you. So it's dweebsglobal.org and it's completely free. I am here today with a very special guest. His name is Jeffrey Deskovic. Have I said your last name correctly?
Deskovic.
Deskovic, okay. Jeffrey Deskovic. Jeffrey was wrongly convicted of rape and murder at the age of 16. He spent 16 years behind bars, ultimately being exonerated through the DNA Databank, which identified the actual perpetrator. He has gone on to start the Jeffrey Deskovic Foundation for Justice, having already helped exonerate 8 other falsely accused. He's passed 3 laws and has 10 active cases he is working on, and has also gone back to school and obtained his law degree in hopes of using it to help others. So thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me. You know, when you're able to free people who are, wrongfully convicted, I mean, that's like the holy grail right there. I mean, that's to reach back and help somebody that was in a similar situation to what I was. I mean, that's the ultimate, to be able to free somebody that way.
Yeah, it's amazing. It's amazing what you've done with what you've been handed, and how you have used your resources and really your life to dedicate to helping others. And it's really respect that. I don't think there's not enough of you out there. So
Thank you. Yes.
Thanks for doing it. So I kind of want to get into your background a little bit. Where are you from?
Yeah, so I was born in North Tarrytown, which is now referred to as Sleepy Hollow. So people remember the legend of Sleepy Hollow with the Headless Horseman and everything. So I was born there. I grew up in Peekskill, which was a short 20 minutes north of there in the same county, in Westchester County, New York.
Okay. And you born and raised there. What was your childhood like?
Yeah, I mean, I had a pretty happy childhood. I grew up in this apartment complex called Crossroads Apartments, and there were a lot of buildings, and there were a lot of kids that lived there in the surrounding areas, and they would frequently come over and we'd play in the playground or in the tennis court or in the swimming pool. We'd go to the parks and we would do all kinds of things. And really, I was kind of like the life of the party, in the sense that whatever I would suggest, it was me and one other boy that whatever we would suggest would usually be what the group did. Whether that was, we're going to ride bikes, we're going to go play Monopoly, we're going to swim, hey, we're going to go play basketball, we're going to play stickball, we're going to play one kind of game. We even invented a few games. So that was me growing up, and it continued that way through high school. But except that the change though was that that was after school. So in school, and I had skipped a grade when I was younger, so everyone in the high school was like a year older than me, and but it felt like the gap was like longer than that, because I really wasn't into what they were into. They were into like drinking and cake parties and and chasing girls and dating, and I wasn't really into that. I was really into what I just mentioned before. So as a result of that, I didn't fit in, and I just became like quiet and withdrawn into myself. So I had that life while in school, and then I had the other life after school.
So did you have a lot of friends at that point when you were?
I did. I had a lot of friends at that point. The other thing I wanted to just share for listeners is, Peekskill, New York. Again, it was suburbs, and people should think ethnically diverse and think middle class.
Got you. So living the way that most of us lived. When did things take I guess things didn't really take a turn. It was pretty sudden. What was the circumstance of the rape and the murder? I guess before I even ask you how you became a subject.
Sure. So in terms of how I became aware of everything, the victim was in a photography class in the high school, and she was and like everyone else in the class, she was given an assignment to go and shoot certain foliage, and the teacher had assigned like male students with the female students, as like a buddy system, like a safety protocol, and the male student who was assigned to Angela skipped out, played hooky on the assignment, and for some reason, that was like the one. And Angela, just for context, she was an immigrant. She was from Colombia, She had been in the country for about a year and a half. She was working on speaking English. Her English was, somewhat limited. And she lived a very sheltered life. She never went anywhere unless she was accompanied by her older sister or her parents. So this male student skipped out on the assignment, and for some reason, I guess she just wanted to, stretch out and feel her own individuality, almost like we were talking about. So when she, as I understand it, when she went home with her sister went to the bathroom, and when she came out, her other sister was gone. Angela went to went to her assignment at Hillcrest Park to shoot the photos. She went without her, so that was the only time she had ever went anywhere without anybody there, and she went missing. And I remember hearing an announcement over the Peekskill High School PA system, announcing that she was missing, and that if anybody had saw her or heard her, they should come to the principal's office, right away. In fact, there was even an article in the in the newspaper. Murders were pretty rare in Peekskill. At that point, there hadn't been a murder there in maybe 20 years.
I mean, teenage murders in a middle-class neighborhood is rare, period.
Yes.
How well did you know Angela?
Not very well. I mean, it all depends. The short answer is not very well. I mean, again, I put a little color to it. I mean, how do you want to define the word no? I mean, she was in two of my classes as a freshman, one as a sophomore. I knew her name. She knew mine. We weren't even on a hi-bye basis. I mean, I think I spoke to her, two times?
Sounds like the majority of people I knew throughout school as well. So it's
right.
Yeah. Knew the face, knew the name, slightly knew the personality, and not much.
Right.
So how did you become a suspect?
Yes, I became a suspect because the police interviewed many students at the high school, and some of them told the police that they might want to speak to me because I seemed strange to them because I didn't fit in. So that was how I originally got on the police radar. Second factor was I was a sensitive teenager, and this was really my first brush with death. And I reacted emotionally, and the police interpreted my being emotional. They thought that my emotional reaction was disproportionate to what my actual relationship with her was, and so they looked at that as some kind of outward sign that I was sorry for what I had done. I just want to point out again, for context, though, while I was emotional, I mean, I don't think I was all that. I don't think I was that different from everybody else. I mean, this really shook the whole Peekskill community up to the point where free mental health counseling was offered to anybody in the city that wanted it. And there was like a population of approximately like 25,000 people that lived in Peekskill.
Right.
Maybe a reinforcing factor was that the police got a psychological profile from the NYPD, which purported to have the psychological characteristics of the actual perpetrator, and I had the misfortune of matching that profile. So that was like a type of reinforcing factor.
Got you. I'm guessing they were interviewed your friends as well at this point.
Yes, they did. Yes. Mm-hmm. Yeah, they interviewed other people as well, including some of my friends. Yes.
Right. Were your friends there to back you up? Were they?
Well, I don't really know what they said. I mean, certainly nobody said anything, nobody said anything incriminating, about me. I mean, the time when the crime happened, I was actually playing wiffle ball with one of my friends. We came up with this creative way of how to play wiffle ball, like one-on-one.
And I guess they, well, as kids, as kids and as guys, we'll find any way for competition. It's
absolutely, yes,
in our genes. But I guess they didn't believe your friend, your alibi.
Yeah, as far as I know, they never interviewed him, and that would be, I mean, not to jump too far ahead in the story, but that would be a mistake that was repeated, by my attorney as well. He never interviewed my alibi, never called him as a witness.
That is crazy. So you were brought in for questioning. I guess this was pretty early on.
Yeah, this was pretty early on. I mean, look, I lived right across the street from the high school. The police were able to, act. It wasn't hard for them to guess, like, there's only two routes to get to the high school from where I lived at. And on my way to the high school, these two men in long trench coats stepped out of the car, an unmarked car, and called my name. And they said they were police officers, and they wanted me to come down to the police station so I could help them out. And I told them, well, I don't know anything about the crime, so I don't see how I could possibly help you out. And they insisted they wanted me to come down to the police station to help them out, nonetheless. And so I did. And that became, that became the starting point of everything. So for about 6 weeks, the police played this cat and mouse game with me, in which when half the time when they would speak to me, they would talk to me as if I was a suspect. And then when they would push too hard, and they would, I would start to become, frightened. Then they would switch up the tactic, and they would then start talking to me like pretending like they needed my help to solve the crime. Jeff is this junior detective helper theme would be played. So, it kept me off balance, emotionally, psychologically. I didn't really understand what was happening. And a couple of quick background things which intersect into that dynamic. I mean, I came from a single parent household. My father was never involved in my life in any way, and that intersected with this good cop, bad cop tactic that they executed on me, which is, have one officer takes on a more aggressive role, whereas his partner pretends to be opposed to the crime, a friend, like opposed to what's going on, like a friend, but it was somehow powerless to intervene. And obviously, the purpose of that tactic is that when a person who's being questioned becomes frightened, you would naturally look to a friendly face for assistance. And I began to look to that officer who was pretending to be my friend. I began to look up to him as like a father figure, positive adult male role model. The second thing is, before I was a teenager, the career that I dreamed of having when I grew up was to be a cop. So this unexpected early opportunity to do this quasi-police work was how the police were able to pull the wool over my eyes as to the absurdity that a 16-year-old would be able to assist in an active homicide investigation.
Right. How was your mom? How was your mom handling you being taken in and questioned, and you dealing with the cops?
Well, she didn't know. She only knew the first time. She knew the first time, and then and we had. She made clear to me that she didn't want me to speak to the police any further. But I was 16 years old, and I knew better than my mother was. And look, I'm innocent. I don't know anything about the crime. I don't, I don't see how anything bad can happen from any of this. I mean, look, the cops are our friends. They're there to protect us. They're telling me they need my help to solve. Look, you don't understand what's going on. Just, and I just would keep interacting with them, and she didn't know that. And the police, knew that. They knew that my mother didn't want me speaking to them. They knew that I didn't want my mother to know, and so they worked around that. They facilitated my keeping her in the dark.
Okay. How did they get you to a point? Is we hear about this happening all the time, and it's really hard for somebody to imagine that hasn't been through it. But how did they get you to a point to essentially confess to the crime?
Yeah. So eventually they got me to agree to a polygraph test. They told me, look, some new information's come into the file, and we want to share that with them, and that's going to allow you to be even more helpful to us. But first, though, you're going to have to take and pass a polygraph test. So the next day, rather than report to the high school, I instead went to the police station, where I had heard the rumor mill that other people had polygraphed. But instead, they drove me to the town of Brewster, which was in Putnam County, whereas I was a native of Peekskill in Westchester County. So it was about 40 minutes away by car. And so, that meant I was not able to leave on my own. I was totally dependent upon the police. Because it was a school day, my mother and grandmother, whom I lived, they thought that I was in school, and so they had no idea anything was wrong, so they did not call around looking for me. I didn't have an attorney present. They didn't give me anything to eat the entire time I was there. They gave me a 4-page brochure which explained how the polygraph worked, but it had a lot of big words in it that I didn't understand. But then I pushed past my own concern by just thinking, oh, I'm here to help the police, so what does it matter? Let's just get on with it.
Right.
From there, they put me in a small room, and they gave me countless cups of coffee, which seems pretty clear in hindsight. The purpose of doing that was to get me wired up.
Oh, yeah.
And then they attached the polygraph machine to me. And then this polygraphist who, by the way, this polygraph was his Putnam County Sheriff's investigator, but he was dressed as a civilian. He never identified himself as a cop. I had no idea he was a police officer. He never read me my rights. And he launched into his third-degree tactics. So he invaded my personal space. He raised his voice at me. He kept asking me the same questions over and over again. You know, and in the manner he was conducting himself, I mean, it was very frightening, especially for me that, you know, I was not used to talking to grown men, you know, much less somebody who was, you know, acting like he was. So he kept that up for 6.5 to 7 hours. And, you know, as each hour goes by, my fear is increasing in proportion to the time. And finally, he says, what do you mean you didn't do it? You just told me through the polygraph result that you did. We just want you to verbally confirm it. And that really shot my fear through the roof. And that's when that officer who had been pretending to be my friend, he came in the room and told me that the other officers were going to harm me, but that he had been holding them off, but could not do so any longer, that I had to help myself. Then he added that if I did as I wanted, that they'd stop what they were doing, that I could go home afterwards, that I was not going to be arrested. Being young, naive, frightened, 16 years old, not thinking about the long-term implications, just being concerned with my safety in the moment. I mean, I was overwhelmed emotionally and psychologically. You know, there was this push-pull dynamic in play. I mean, on one hand, there was the possibility of harm he threw in the air, and on the other, he made this false promise. He threw me this false life preserver. And so I made the decision to make up a story based upon the information that they had given me in the course of that interrogation and in the 6 weeks run up to it, as well as some items from the newspaper. So by the time it was all said and done, you know, I had collapsed onto the floor in a fetal position, crying uncontrollably. You know, needless to say, I was arrested and I was charged with the murder and rape.
Right. It's so hard to believe they put you through that.
I don't want to jump too far ahead, but just on this point, I mean, I've been home for 14 years now, and I do a lot of advocacy work, as you alluded to, and you know, part of that is doing speaking engagements and media interviews, and even just in formal meetings and informal conversations. And sometimes, like there's been times in the past. I mean, I'm not there anymore, but there've been times in the past where I felt like really stupid. You know, and I question, you know, this is pretty stupid what you're doing right now. You know, it was very stupid what you did. And that you're going around, you know, you falsely confessed to something you didn't do, and it wound up costing you 16 years of your life. And, you know, you're going around telling people about it. You should stop speaking about it and just like crawl under a rock someplace and like never be heard from again.
Right. Well,
you know, so I have had that feeling, that sentiment.
Well, thank you for not letting that happen, because I doing 1,000 times more good sharing it. And
Absolutely, yes.
Is there a secret that you have that helped you get over that, or is it just it's something?
Yeah, I mean, I guess just think over time. I mean, maybe the secret is this: is that I've come to realize that my mission in the world, you know, is to do this anti-wrongful conviction work, and you know, that's how I make sense of everything that I do, and I just look at the false confession as just as part of that process, and I've just kind of come to be at peace with that. But it took me a really long time to get there.
Was there any other evidence against you?
Yeah, so before I went to trial, the results of a DNA test came in from the FBI lab, which showed that semen found in the victim didn't match me, which, you know, by rights, the case should have ended right then and there. But not wanting to, instead, they continued to prosecute me full speed ahead. In order to explain away this DNA evidence, the prosecutor got the medical examiner to commit fraud. So when there's an autopsy done, there's written and audio notes which are done at the same time as findings are made. And so it was only 6 months after doing that autopsy, hundreds of autopsies later, that he suddenly, in order to help the prosecutor get around the DNA evidence, this medical examiner claims that he remembered that he forgot to document medical evidence that he said showed that the victim had been sleeping around, which is what allowed the prosecutor to argue that it didn't matter that the DNA evidence didn't match me. That didn't mean I was innocent. That was just yet another person that she slept with prior to my murdering and raping her. Taking it a step further, he named another youth by name, another student from the high school that he claimed had slept with the victim. But he never performed. He never tried to support that. He never set the proper evidentiary foundation. He never had that other person give a DNA sample. He never even called him as a witness. He just simply made the unsupported argument to the jury. Not having been content with having coerced a false confession out of me, the police officers also falsely attributed a statement to me. They claimed that I said to them that I said that I didn't know if the perpetrator ejaculated or not. But that word was not in my vocabulary as a 16-year-old, and further, that statement didn't appear in any of their early police reports. Their written accounts of the interrogation. That only appeared in their notes after the DNA didn't match me. So it's pretty compelling evidence that they came up with that, again, specifically trying to help the prosecutor get around the DNA. In terms of my defense attorney, I had a public defender, and I'd never been arrested before. His attitude was, look, just when I would question him, like, well, what is your plan? What's your strategy? How are you going to defend me? His attitude was like, well, look, just sit back. I'm the lawyer. Let me do my job. Okay. You got into all this trouble in the first place by you thinking that you know better than adults. Just sit back and let me do this. And that's what I did. I didn't know any better. By this point, I was 17 years old. I had gotten bailed out, and I went to trial shortly after my 17th birthday. And his attorney essentially didn't defend me. He never interviewed or called as a witness my alibi. He never explained to the jury the significance of the DNA not matching me. He never used that to argue that it proved that this confession was coerced and false. He never cross-examined this medical examiner to expose his fraud. I mean, he literally asked him no questions. He rarely met with me. When he would meet with me and I tried to explain to him what happened in the interrogation room and that I was innocent, he was always shutting me up. One time he told me he didn't care if I was guilty or innocent. When I hadn't decided if I was going to have a bench trial, which is decided by a judge, or go with the jury trial, which was something we were thinking about in light of the confession. He came to me one day and told me that the judge came to him off the record and told him to pick a jury because he didn't want to be responsible for finding me not guilty. My lawyer was supposed to put that on the record and ask the judge to recuse himself because it wasn't proper for him to limit my decision that way, and suggest that bias. Perhaps he was feeling some public pressure because every time I made a court appearance, it was a major media moment. He should have never represented me in the first place because of a conflict of interest. This other youth that the prosecutor was falsely saying had slept with the victim was represented by another member of that same Westchester County Legal Aid, the public defender's office, and specifically by the lawyer who was supposed to be supervising him on my case. So that conflict prevented the defense from asking him to provide a DNA sample. It prevented the defense from calling him as a witness to explode the whole consensual sex theory. Lastly, I wanted to testify at the pre-trial hearing as to the threat and the false promise, but he wouldn't allow me to do that. He said that he hadn't decided if I was going to testify at the trial or not. And in the event that I did, he said that very seldom do people tell the same story in exactly the same way, and that if there was any variation at all, even if it was slight, that the prosecutor could make it appear as though I was lying, even if I had not, which didn't really make a lot of sense because, firstly, if the judge had believed me, then the statements would have been ruled involuntary and therefore not admissible as evidence. And without that, they wouldn't have had a trial. And secondly, if it really went that badly, I didn't have to testify at the trial. And if I didn't, there would be no way that the prior testimony could be used. But then when I got to the trial, he wouldn't allow me to testify there either. He told me it wasn't his job to prove I was innocent. It was up to the prosecutor to prove that I was guilty, and he didn't think that it happened. Yeah, that might be a legal principle, but that's a naive way to practice law. In reality, you have to try to prove your client didn't commit the crime, or they run a significant risk of being wrongfully convicted. I mean, particularly in a confession case where there's a 80% conviction rate. I mean, you have to answer that confession. You have to explain that confession. You have to disprove as many aspects of the confession as you can and bring it all together in your closing argument, or you run a risk, again, of being wrongfully convicted. But he didn't do any of that. last thing I wanted to mention is that other irregularity regarding my trial was that the victim's clothing had been entered into evidence. So her pants, her moccasins, and her bra and her shirt. So at one point during the jury deliberation, the jury, and I want to mention one other thing about him, then I'll come right back to that point. He was all over the place. So at times he was arguing to the jury that the confession never happened. At other times he was arguing that the confession happened, but it was false. At still other times, he was simply arguing that it was coerced. So when you take that kind of scattershot approach, you lose your credibility. I mean, I had no chance in the beginning. So all that happened, and at some point, the jury asked to see the victim's bra. And that was a short, bright spot for the defense. I remember my lawyer turned to me and he said, "Good. They're thinking like I want them to think. There's some bras that can't be ripped off of the victim's body." That was one of the statements in the coerced false confession. So, but then, so them asking to see the bra, that if they could have saw that for themselves, then I possibly could have been acquitted. But that's when the judge told us that the clothes had been left in the courtroom overnight, and that apparently the custodians, the cleaners, that they thought it was garbage, and so they threw it out. And he allowed a photograph in which, quote unquote, you can almost see the bra. He allowed that to be substituted as for the actual bra itself.
Wow.
And ultimately I was, wrongfully convicted and given a 15 to life sentence.